78% of American public admit to having cheated at some point in their lives. And so cheating is prevalent. So if we look to go back to the very beginning of human nature, we think to ourselves, are we actually meant to be monogamous? And the bonobos, the monkeys that we have evolved from, have taught us probably not. And if that's the case, many of the people who I talk to and that I work with, and the 100 families that I interviewed for this book, all told me I started off just being unhappy. Unhappy in my sex life, unhappy in my relationship, unhappy in my marriage, and trying to find a new way of looking at things. Or I cheated or got divorced, and I thought, I don't want to be stuck in the same situation I just walked out of. And so that's what I'm looking to solve for here. I'm looking to normalize a conversation that says that we as humans can operate naturally the way that we were kind of built.
Welcome back to the Perpetual Growth Podcast, the show where we explore the strategies, insights, and stories that help you to grow your business, strengthen your relationships, and elevate your life. Because growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Now, a quick ask before we dive in today. If you get value from these conversations, follow the show, share the episode with someone who needs it, and leave a review. It helps us continue bringing thoughtful, courageous leaders into the room. Today's episode is different. We talk a lot about growth in business, systems, revenue, capital, execution. But what if the real constraint isn't strategy? What if it's how we structure our relationships? Today's guest is Candace Klein, corporate executive, leader, lawyer and go-to-market leader, and author of Polyagony, all the ways that we up open relating. Candace has led at the highest levels of fintech and enterprise revenue, but today we're talking about something more fundamental: how we design connection, how we sabotage intimacy, and how the architecture of our relationships determines the architecture of our own lives. Candace, welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast.
I'm so excited to join you, Zach. It's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited. Now, Candace, I always like to start here because I think it reveals a lot about who somebody is and how they really think. What does growth mean to you right now, not as an executive, but as a human being?
So I think of growth as a liberation. And I actually, I teach a liberation series. And so I always ask the people I'm working with, clients and students of mine, what are you liberating yourself from? What is holding you back? And it could be stories of my past, limiting beliefs from my past. It could be other people's expectations of my future. It could be stories that I have about money or stories that I have about my body. It could be shadows, things I'm afraid of about myself. Or it could be my inability to relate with others or build community. And so I look at growth in all of those aspects. I'd say, okay, if I'm not moving forward, then I'm stuck. And so if I'm stuck somewhere, that's where I get to grow next.
That's beautiful. Now, I want to talk about the premise of your book, right? I mean, you wrote Polyagony to unpack the ways that people, mess up open relating, right? So
Yep.
start here. What is open relating really?
Yeah. So to back up about what open relating is, I guess I need to start off with let's just talk about relationships. And so
Hmm.
now more than 70% of relationships end in divorce or marriages end in divorce. It is a very high number now. 78% of American public adults admit to having cheated at some point in their lives. And so cheating is prevalent. So if we look to go back to the very beginning of human nature, we think to ourselves, are we actually meant to be monogamous? And the bonobos, the monkeys that we have evolved from, have taught us probably not. And if that's the case, many of the people who I talk to and that I work with, and the 100 families that I interviewed for this book, all told me I started off just being unhappy. Unhappy in my sex life, unhappy in my relationship, unhappy in my marriage, and trying to find a new way of looking at things. Or I cheated or got divorced, and I thought, I don't want to be stuck in the same situation I just walked out of. And so that's what I'm looking to solve for here. I'm looking to normalize a conversation that says that we as humans can operate naturally the way that we were kind of built, through evolution. We can do that and still be integrous, still communicate, still build long-lasting, trusting, positive relationships. And that's why open relating is becoming a bigger conversation. And what I'll say
Yeah.
is about 20% of American adults now also identify as non-monogamous in some way, and it's a fast-growing subculture.
Wow, both of those statistics are shocking. I mean, the most recent thing I'd
Mm.
heard was, the 50% divorce rate. That knowing now that it's
Mm.
jumped to 70%
Yeah, yeah.
is a little bit unsettling. Now,
Mhm.
one of the questions that pops to my mind is, I'm curious from a standpoint of faith.
Hmm.
what is the intersection between faith? Let's just use Christianity as a guidepost. What is the intersection between faith and polygamy and having open relationships?
So there is a difference between polygamy and polyamory. And so
Mhm.
polygamy is marrying multiple people.
Or excuse me,
Polyamory is
polyamory. Yes.
lovering. Yeah,
Thank you for the
totally fine.
correction.
Totally fine. Yeah, I'm not advocating
Uh,
breaking the law in any way.
yeah,
But
yeah.
what I would say, what I would say is this, that I, I'm not flying in the face of anyone's religion. But I'm not subscribing to anyone's religion. I believe in love.
Mhm,
I believe in love and I believe in abundance. And
mhm,
so I believe in abundance in wealth, and I experience that in my life as well when it comes to financial. And I also believe that we as humans can love with with it, love with abundance. And so if anyone's ever had children, and so you've gotten married and you're like, I'm going to commit myself to this person for the rest of my life till death do us part, and then you have a child, because I'm a mom, that your heart expands when you have a child. And it's not like I have 100 units of love and my husband gets 50 units and my child gets 50. And then when I have a second child, they only get 25. That's not the way this works. Like love is something that is abundant in nature. And so it continues to grow. And so I am a big believer that spirituality, which I do subscribe to, is a supporter of love with abundance, of building community. And so I believe that I'm aligned with that.
mhm. Oh, beautiful. Um, there's so much to peel back here. I'm not even honestly sure where to start. I mean, one of the things that um, I guess one of my many curiosities is is it what do you find? Is this more of a balance of like, okay, are we in polyamory, is it I have my devoted partner and this is my loving relationship, and then these are like the um, more primal like sexual based relationships on the other side of the spectrum? Is true polyamory more a combination of like multiple intimate relationship? What is that balance, or
Yeah.
is that different for everybody?
It's different for everyone. So there are multiple flavors. There's 32 flavors like Baskin Robbins, right? So there's so multiple flavors of polyamory. And what I would say is this: it starts off with just asking yourself, am I able to love one person? And like, if the answer of that is yes, great, you're monogamous. That's beautiful. I celebrate that. I personally am not. I am not able to love one person, and I am not willing to limit myself to loving one person. Now, what I look at is I see multiple layers of love, and I talk about this in Polyagony that there's multiple levels. You can have some scenarios where I'm just drawn to a person. I'm just attracted to him. Maybe I want to kiss him. Where I want to build a deep friendship with someone that may evolve eventually into something more romantic. There's so many different layers and levels here. And what polyamory is saying is we agree, potentially, I agree as an individual, or we agree as a couple, that we don't want to limit each other to only being able to have that type of connection with one person, with me. And saying, so I say to my partner, I want you to be able to love anyone you want to love as you want to love them. And him saying that back to me. Now this takes lots of different flavors. And so in the book, I have a glossary, an 80-page glossary online at polyagony.com of all the definitions in polyamory. But there's like swingers, and there's relationship anarchy, and there's kitchen table poly, and there's parallel poly. There's all kinds of different flavors here. One, the swinger side is pure sex, right? Like that's just like we just want to go out and like experience something else that's not in our home. And that's
Mhm,
great. That is okay. And that is part of this beautiful kind of ecosystem. And then there's the other side, kitchen table poly, where I want my family, my kids to grow up with kids of people who I love, that I might be in a romantic relationship. I want us to all go on trips together. I want us to have barbecues together. So it can range.
mhm. You know, that's an interesting conversation of itself. So, I mean, you have kids. I'm a father of three. My oldest is
Hmm.
17, middle's 9, youngest is 6. And in a polyamorous relationship dynamic, how how is that managed? I mean, you talk about, potentially going on a vacation. I mean, are you bringing all of those loved ones along? I mean, do you have I guess maybe a better question is, what is your current belief and foundation? I mean, where do you lean across those 32 different
Yeah.
flavors, and then how do you integrate that into your life?
Yeah, so I'll happily answer that in a couple of different ways. So first, I am kitchen table poly. So what that means is that I am very dear friends with the people who I choose to interact with in a more romantic way. That they all know my husband, they all know my son. Now, and so my son and my husband and I are very open and keep no secrets, and so everyone's friends. As it relates to our kids, there's a whole section in the book on poly parenting, which is one, how do you come out to your kids if you choose to? And then two, how do you keep an ongoing dialogue going in a way that is age appropriate and that is sharing the appropriate amount of information? My son doesn't want to know my sex life with my husband. He's 6. So, like, I wouldn't be talking about that with him anyway.
Yeah.
But, as he was growing up, he's always known that we are polyamorous. And it started off with books when he was 2 or 3 years old on the Pride Parade, and I would just read books about the Pride Parade and I would talk about LGBTQ and we'd add a P at the end. And he'd say, "Which of the letters are you?" And I would say, "Oh, well, I'm a B and a Q." And so that's how we would talk about things. Or we talk about dates and we have mommy son dates and mommy and daddy go on dates and mommy goes on a date with Katie. And so that's something that we've always just been very fluid with in our conversations. That's all he needs to know at this point. And as he gets older, as he has questions, then we will be opening up new layers of conversation. And that's actually there's a whole guide in Polyagony about how to have these conversations at different age points.
Yeah. And I would imagine not just with the kids, but also with your significant other. I mean, I would have to, I suspect, I'm curious, is there has to be a very strong layer of emotional maturity, emotional intelligence to be able to manage this type of relationship dynamic. And, observationally, I believe that that's also something that a very significant portion of the American populace tends to lack in one area or another. And not putting myself on a pedestal, I know I do as well. I mean, we all struggle in various aspects of our emotional intelligence, but
Sure.
what is I mean, where did where do those conversations even start? I mean, I have to imagine that people are start to wonder, maybe this is a conversation they're having with themselves, like, is there something wrong with me? Am I not supposed to believe this way? Because there's a big difference between what we're conditioned to believe
Yeah.
in society and other places. I mean, this is I'll let you take it from there. I mean, I just
Yeah,
left you with a lot.
yeah.
Tell me more
So,
about
yeah,
that.
first, I think it's going to be important to explain that polyagony is actually a trilogy. So, there are three sections or three different books. There
Mm,
is the foundation, which is, am I even poly? And like asking yourself the hard questions, unmonogamizing yourself, so moving out of what's been encultured into you, and like really figuring out what your purpose is, what your decision is for yourself. There's, how do I talk about this with my partner, and how do we set agreements for what we're both comfortable with, and there's always varying levels of comfort, and so we're never, any of us who are in a couple, we're never completely aligned all the time, right? So,
hmm
so
Yeah.
for instance, I'm an extrovert, my husband's an introvert. So what we do is we talk about how to set agreements to meet at the lowest common denominator where both people can be comfortable,
hmm
and slowly evolve those over time. So all that's in the foundation. The second then is the expansion. That's when you actually go on a date with a third person, right? So like expanding outside of the couple. And so there's a whole series of like, how do we talk about this with other people? If another person goes on a date with me, what do I tell them I'm available for? Am I available to fall in love, or am I just available for something casual? And then now they've become metamors with my partner. So how do I manage that dynamic now between these two people who didn't choose to be in relationship with each other, but both chose to be in relationship with me? So there's a whole book on that. Poly parenting falls into that, right? Because now there are other people that are impacted. Coming out of the closet is in that book, right? So, like, how do I actually come out to my family, to my coworkers and social media? Like, should I come out? That whole debate. And then finally, the third book is The Reckoning. And so this is all of the mistakes, like the paper cuts, the deal breakers, relationship evolution, and the ending of relationships and conscious uncoupling. And so there's like a whole arc here, of work that one has to do if they choose to move into this way of living.
Yeah, you shared a tremendous amount of value right there. And one of the biggest things that captured my attention is I'm a firm believer that it's one of the core components that most people do not set as an integral foundation to their relationship, which is agreements. And
Hmm.
it's not just agreements in our sex lives. It's everything to do with our finances, our day-to-day activities, our friendships, our parenting styles, and in so many contexts. And people are flying by the seat of their pants, and then we wonder why we have conflict. There's not enough
Hmm.
open communication, and then finding what that point of integration is between our differing personalities and belief systems and rules and values. And that in and of itself, I think, is probably one of the greatest destructors in so many relationships, is we try
Yes.
to force our own ideologies and beliefs onto the other person instead of finding that middle ground. And you just mentioned, like, you and your husband, introvert, extrovert. That's one example of in so many cases we are attracted to our polar opposite.
Yep. Yep.
That's where
Yep.
the magnetism comes from. So when it comes to those agreements, when it comes to the opposing value systems, like, so I guess, if you don't mind, let's peel back the onion with you and your husband as an example.
Yeah.
So if he's an introvert and you are an extrovert, was this something where you guys, when you first met, you both were in alignment um in the poly world, or was this something where he had never even considered that opportunity and you presented it to him and he thought, well, hey, this is absolutely something that I can get on board with? I mean, how did that dynamic evolve with you two, if you don't
Yeah.
mind using you as an example?
Yeah, so I'm happy to share my example, and then I'm going to share an opposite example too. So,
Please. Yeah.
in my example, I had been polyamorous for years when I met my husband, and we met in an environment. We met at something called Intimacy Fest, which was, like, how do you create intimacy with yourself and the world around you? And so,
Hmm.
and it was a beautiful story. We like wrote a love letter to ourselves and then read it to each other, and that's how we met. So it's just like the perfect meet cute, right?
Hmm.
But when I met my life partner, my twin flame, I said, I am a wild horse. I cannot be tamed. And so from the moment that he met me, he knew, there was no question about who this woman is. And he like walked in eyes wide open. And so now it was new. And so it was new for him, but it was something that from day one, we were working on our agreements together. That is not the norm. And so like as I mentioned, I've like interviewed 100 families for this book, and as I interviewed them, the majority opened up later. Like so I can give the example of Gus and Anna. So in Gus and Anna's scenario, they were together for 6 years, had a child, and then decided they were going to open up. That's a much more common situation, and that's what takes a lot of work, because you have to like unwind the tape a bit, because now
Hmm.
you've got 6 years of history, where we've always done things this way, and we now are changing the way we're doing things. And so that's
Hmm.
where agreements become really important. And
Yeah.
I actually encourage you, don't start off with agreements. Start off with
Really?
fears. Start off with
Uh,
fears.
mm,
And so like if you're going to start somewhere, sit down and be like, this is what I'm afraid of.
mm,
And what you're afraid of will guide what your agreements should be to start. Agreements are typically guardrails that keep your nervous system regulated.
mm-hmm.
So if you can start off by, this is what I'm afraid of, great. How do we protect against that fear? And that becomes your first set of agreements.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing all that. What I'm curious about too is when we talk about agreements and we talk about guardrails. I mean, just like in any other aspect of a relationship, you brought up cheating as an example, and that's a breach in a potential agreement. Or maybe it was one that was never actually discussed. I mean, many times it's assumed, and not that it's that I don't want to position it as a right or a wrong statement, but when I have to imagine that in a poly relationship, there's still the opportunity for people to breach those guardrails and breach those agreements. And now we're running into the same situations that we would whether we were in a monogamous relationship. So,
Yeah.
I, we're, uh, I don't want to ask a redundant question, but how would you speak to that as being a potential problem or opportunity in any relationship?
Yes, I mean the this is, the subtitle is like, all the ways we f up open relating. But what I would tell
Yeah.
you is that now many people have been reading the book, and many of them are not polyamorous, and they're like, oh God, Candace, this is a great book for me and my partner just to work through like how to be in relationship with each other. So like,
Beautiful.
one, first, what are our agreements? What are our fears? What are our desires? What
Mhm.
meaning do we subscribe to sex? What aftercare do we need? What's my erotic blueprint? What turns me on? How do I communicate? What's my attachment style? All of these are the things we're talking about in the book, right? So you can learn so much about yourself and so much about your partner just by going through these exercises. Well, something you just said that was important, Zach, that I want to speak to first is what happens. It's one thing if you make an agreement. I'm not going to X. I'm not going to go play poker with the boys on a Friday night, right? And then you go
Hmm.
do it anyway. That is a
Hmm.
clear rupture. That is a clear violation of a stated agreement.
Hmm.
But what if it wasn't an agreement? What if it was just like assumed? I'll give an
Right.
example. One of the people who I interviewed in my book was a man by the name of Dean. And Dean, he told me a story about how his wife expected that he would always keep his wedding ring on, but they never discussed it. So he was, on a date or doing something, and he took the ring off. He took his ring off, and it was because I think he was giving someone a massage or something. But for some reason, the ring came off. Right? He came home without his wedding ring on, and that created a massive breakdown in the relationship. And they had to have major conversations about it, discussed it. So he said, when did that?
You're okay. I
Okay,
can see
sorry.
it.
When did that become an agreement? And so one of the things that I think is really beautiful about polyamory is it forces you to have conversation all the time because
Mhm.
you're triggered by things that you never knew you'd be triggered by. Like in a monogamous situation, if I took my ring off, I would probably the partner would still probably get upset. Like, why did you take your ring off? That's
Mhm.
not poly versus mono, but it comes up more often because you have more invitations for these types of scenarios.
Mhm.
Now, you asked,
What's
what do you do about it? And what do you
yeah.
do about it? So there has to be a commitment to repair. There has to be a commitment on both sides of the relationship to repair. Rupture is inevitable.
Mhm.
Rupture is inevitable, by the way, in any relationship, romantic or otherwise. It will happen. There will be a breakdown. And so one of the things that I have a manifesto that I share with partners that I say, these are my what I require, and these are my deal breakers. And so I would say I require a commitment to repair. So
Mhm.
we can get upset with each other, but we got to come back to the table and be both committed to repairing.
Mhm.
And so that commitment to repair can look like nonviolent communication. There are tools that you can use, but a commitment to continue to come back and repair that
Mhm.
relationship.
What's so beautiful about, I mean, the undertone to everything that you're speaking to. I mean, while the book and the predominant focus overall is on poly relationships, at the same time, I heard you very clearly say that any of these tools are applicable in any relationship. And as you were speaking, and I've thankfully done a lot of work on myself so I could show up a lot better in my relationship with my wife, and studied the Gottman method in intimate detail. And I'm hearing
Yes.
so many of these core components that make a relationship great in any context. So everything that you are doing, everything that you are teaching, fundamentally, foundationally, in every single context, expands and works across context. So I love that the gift that you are presenting is, it's expanding people's worldview in terms of what may or may not be possible, something that they may or not have, may or may not have considered in the past. And even if it's not something that feels appropriate for them, there's still value that anybody can take away from your books and your overall series. And that's a really
Yes.
powerful gift. I mean, it's the power of perspective, it's the power of tools and exercise and choice, and actually how to start communicating in a way that sets our relationship up to be stronger as a whole, regardless of what we do.
Exactly. And the reason that we did this as a trilogy too is that, in book one, that's all just foundational relationship tools. It's all foundational relationship templates. So of course we have Gottman. And of course we have
Mhm.
nonviolent communication. And of course,
Mhm.
there are so many wonderful tools. And then book three is all about relationship evolution and conscious uncoupling. Also super relevant,
Mhm.
whether you're mono or poly. Book
Mhm.
two is the only book that is really about dating other people. So,
Mhm.
so like about like actually how to do it, right? Like what are the
Yeah.
mechanics and like how do I do it? But books one and three are absolutely appropriate for anyone who is in
Mhm.
relationship. And what I would also say is this, you talked about this in the intro that I'm a corporate executive. I have led I led Emotional Intelligent Leadership Academy for 4 years. That was just focused on emotional intelligence, and I happen
Yeah.
to be polyamorous. And so
Mhm.
I'm a big believer that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And these tools I have found that help me in business, they help me in life, they help me as a parent. This is not just about who I choose to date.
Mhm. That's amazing. Now, Candace, you've this is a perfect segue. I mean, you've described yourself as a corporate executive, a lawyer, a mom, a wife, a bi-poly queer woman.
Yeah.
That's a very layered identity, right?
Mhm.
What does it cost you? What has it given you to live openly?
So this is a really personal one for me. And I close the book talking about this. Is it worth it in the end? And
Hmm.
because there are trade-offs. There are trade-offs, and it's cost a lot. So I'm gonna tell a story that's hard for me to tell.
Hmm.
And when I was running my leadership academy, I had two students who were adults, married, not poly, monogamous couple, and there was a severe domestic abuse situation. The wife died, and they had three children under the age of 6. And the husband was, on trial for murder. And my family was contacted by the attorneys of the three boys, the three kids, to ask us if we would apply for custody, which we did. And so we cared so deeply about these kids, and we wanted them to be in a safe environment. And while we were in court, advocating for custody of these three children, the husband used the fact that we were poly against us in court, because he did not want those kids to come to us. He wanted them to go to his mom. Point is, the judge ruled against us in the end, and he ruled against us because we're poly. And we had therapists and social workers. Like, we've led an emotional intelligence leadership academy for 4 years, and like, that was the wrong decision. It was the wrong answer. And so that's why I care so deeply about this, because we have to normalize the conversation that there are non-traditional families where children can thrive and be happy and grow. And it doesn't have to look the way it looked in 1952. We're in a different environment today. And I don't want any other family to go through what we went through in court that day. Now, what's interesting is you can choose two different paths when you experience something like that. One is like, let's just go back to the way things should be, right? Let's go back to the way the judge thinks our family should look. Let's just go be monogamous again. But for me, I said, no, let's go advocate. Let's go advocate, because this system needs to change. So it's cost a great amount. It's completely impacted the structure of my family and the structure of the family for these three kids. And this needs to be talked about. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's worth it in the end, because this is who I am. This is the shape of my heart. And I can't change who I am. And
Yeah.
as I continue to go down this path, I'm meeting so many people who are in the LGBTQ community who are identifying with me, saying, this is how I feel too. This is who I am. I can't change the shape of my heart.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your vulnerability. I appreciate you sharing that story. I mean, I'm a firm believer that vulnerability is a superpower, and in this context, it obviously has been a major driver for you. Um, what's interesting about this conversation is, well, there's many things that are interesting, but is if we brought this back to the corporate world for a second, you
Mhm.
know, what would you say to high performing leaders? Actually, before I even ask this question, you talked about the concept of identity.
Mhm.
And, I think I believe that many people fall into conformity as opposed to leading through their true identity. And that's where we
Mhm.
feel disintegrated.
Mhm.
And that leads to a complete lack of fulfillment in many different areas of life. So I really appreciate you bringing all those aspects of identity up and being willing to step into the person that you are and take ownership over your individual values and beliefs and the way that you want to love and lead life.
Mhm.
Now, the question I had was, what would you say to high performing leaders who feel like they need to compartmentalize their identity in order to succeed?
Yeah, so I've actually coached many high performing leaders on this, and what I always tell them is, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so if you find
Mm,
yourself showing up one way at home and another way at work, it will ultimately bleed over. Like, it
mm,
it will never last. And so what I also always say is, the people who thrive in business are the people who are complete humans.
mhm,
And so, I'm a chief commercial officer for a healthcare payments company right now. And when I got hired, I told the CEO, just so you know, I am polyamorous. I wrote a book. I'm doing a TED talk. Like, just so you know, these things are a really important piece of who I am. And he was like, awesome. That's who you are. Great. And
Mhm.
so now I don't have to hide. I don't have to, I call it bifurcation. I don't have to bifurcate who I am. I also did that as a mom. When we had our second child, he only survived for 4 days. And I brought that to work, and I
Mhm.
talked about it openly with my coworkers and my bosses. We had a whole call, a Zoom call, where I said, I need to share this with you as a team so that you know that I'm really hurting and I may not be showing up the same way for the next 3 months as I'm working through trauma. And so many people came to me and said, thank you so much. Like, we aren't allowed to talk about this stuff at work. And I said, why? So, what I would say is, complete humans are the ones that thrive in
Yeah.
business and otherwise. And how you do one thing is how you do everything. If you're hiding it, it's always going to pop up eventually. And there's no such thing as being four different people.
Yeah. I this, that one example, and again, thank you for your vulnerability. But I don't know if you led a paradigm shift in your organization or if you thankfully were a part of a leadership team that already had the emotional intelligence and awareness to uh, and willingness to be able to have those type of open conversations and invite that into the organization. I think that creates a greater sense of connection and community in an organization than just
Hmm.
striving toward the common goal of increasing revenue 20% this year, whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah.
What like did you find, were you the tip of the spear in that particular moment, or was it a were did you already were you working with a leadership team that already had similar and shared values? I mean, how did that how did that scenario unfold for you? How did to expand on that a little bit more, if you would?
It's different. I've worked in several organizations, some of which were woke and very progressive, and others that were not, that were highly conservative. And so, where I very recently made a transition from a very large organization, a financial services organization with 66,000 employees around the globe, very conservative. And so in that environment, I certainly didn't hide any aspect of who I was, but I also, and I talk about this in Polyagony, about like appropriate levels of disclosure. And so like, what is it appropriate to disclose and what is it not appropriate to disclose? Like, what should you not be talking about at work anyway?
Mhm.
But then there is also, social media and other things. And so how do you kind of separate those things? The first thing I
Yeah.
always do is I have a conversation with HR. And so anytime I am starting in a new role, I go have a conversation with HR and I say, okay, HR, just so you know, these are the things that I'm actively involved in. This is who I am. What's appropriate? What am I permitted to disclose and not? And I have a conversation about that. Like, what am I like actually, according to the rules and procedures of this company, what is permitted? And if I start there, then I actually have protection, because legally they can't stop me from talking about anything around what is constitutionally protected. And so then if there is anything that's crunchy, like anything that comes up with a boss or with coworker or a leadership team, I can always go back and say I started here. And that is a great place to begin a conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, wisdom in that context is set yourself up with the appropriate guardrails in your business relationship first, because that way we can't let any personal biases come into play, I guess we could say.
But it is
So
interesting, just on the
yeah.
topic of polyamory, though, of the 100 families that I interviewed,
Mhm.
several of them said, "I can't come out. I can't come out. I'm a teacher. I'm a doctor, and like
Mhm.
for whatever reason, I would lose my job if there is a large population of people who do still stay closeted for fear of losing a job. What I would say is that oftentimes, most of the times, like probably 8 out of 10 times, it's actually not true.
Mhm.
Like legally, you actually are fairly protected because that you can't be fired on behalf of sexual orientation, for instance, because that's a
Mhm.
constitutionally protected class.
Mhm.
However, there is like a cultural piece as well, and so there's a whole spectrum of comfort levels around a disclosure and coming out.
Yeah. There's a lot to navigate, it sounds like. I mean, so
Hmm.
for the listeners who feel tension in their relationship, whether monogamous or open, and they don't know where to start. I mean, what would you say are three foundational principles that they should implement immediately?
First thing is check in with your why. I stole this from Simon Sinek. I can't take it for myself, but it all starts with why.
Great
And
book.
so, yeah, so why? Why am I
Hmm.
unhappy? And if I want something, why do I want it?
Hmm.
And so, like, I would start write them those two questions down on a sheet of paper, put them in your laptop, and then answer that 7 times. So, why am I unhappy? I'm unhappy because my husband and I aren't speaking. Why are we not speaking? Give your seven layers of why on both sides. Why am I unhappy? And why do I want what I want? When you get to that seventh layer, that is likely your core belief. That now you're getting into core beliefs, and that's something that you can start working with your partner on.
Hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Um, on that front, what about, I guess if someone is curious about opening their relationship, what should they do before they ever act? We talked about agreements, but for some people, like one thing that comes to my mind, what do you ever run into a scenario where somebody goes, somebody is thinking like, man, I could never imagine my significant other being with somebody else, but I sure would love that idea. Like, is there ever that contradictory type of thought process pattern behavior? How do people navigate those types of situations? I mean, have you run into that?
Yeah. So it's called a monopoly dynamic. So there are many couples where one person, the couple says, I have absolutely no interest in dating other people. And the other person says, but I have interest. And so that's a monopoly dynamic. And so this also happens quite often in the LGBTQ environment with trans individuals who are transitioning
Hmm.
because they still want to stay married, but now they've transitioned and like they're potentially attracted to a different gender. And so there are many couples who are able to navigate a mono-poly dynamic.
Hmm.
The person who's mono may say, I only have my nervous system can only handle like 2 dates a month. But if you need to go out a couple times a month, I'm okay with that, right? And that's why I say start at the lowest common denominator where both people can be comfortable. In fact, most couples are not exactly the same. In
Hmm.
fact, my
Yeah.
therapist once said to me and my husband, they said, "Is it possible that you're just both playing this game totally differently, and can that be okay?" And that was like a big aha moment for us, and we were like, "Oh, we are, like I am playing the extroverted game, he's playing the introverted game," and so then we were like, "Oh, okay," and we set a new set of agreements and new rules for the game, right? On like how that felt good to both of us.
Hmm.
The one thing I
Now
would
you're,
also say, though, you
yeah,
asked about like where people should start. There
yeah.
are many poly-informed therapists.
Hmm.
There are now also several poly-informed books. So
Hmm.
there is Sex at Dawn by Esther Perel, a New York Times bestseller. There is Ethical Slut, Polywise, Polysecure, More Than Two, and then obviously Polyagony. There are books out there. I really encourage you to read some books. I really encourage you to seek out a poly-informed therapist
Hmm.
before you ever do anything.
Yeah.
And like the beauty of polyagony, the whole first book is all the stuff that you talk about before you actually take a single action, and that can be really good for your relationship because you're going to uncover some other things that are blocking your marriage or your relationship from being successful that have nothing to do
Yeah.
with going outside of the relationship.
Yeah. No, there's two things that you said that are very important there. Well, there's a multitude of things, but one I want to make sure I go back to so that we don't gloss over it because it was so important, and a very critical insight. And to speak to what you just said, um, nobody does it alone. I don't care if it's in business, if it's in health, if it's in your finances. I mean, the most successful in the world in any compartment of life, we get coaches, we get mentors, we get people that have been there and done that so we can condense their decades of knowledge into days and create better
Hmm.
life experiences and better outcomes and more joy and fulfillment that much faster and avoid a lot of those costly pitfalls. So I mean, I love that you acknowledge the power of having the right guide. It's so very
Hmm.
important. But you also said something, and this is the thing I was mentioning, I don't want to gloss over, which was you talked about how, you know, look, sometimes we have to go back and reevaluate our agreements. And, that not only are we different, but I'm not the same person today that I was 10 years ago or 10 years before that. So we're evolving as humans in our beliefs and our desires in every single context. And so thinking that the believing or maintaining the system of belief that the rules that we have in place today are going to be just as applicable 5 or 10 years from now is a little bit ignorant, I think, in many contexts.
Yeah.
So the more that we can open that door and keep that consistent communication and just be doing those little pulse checks, are we
Yeah.
still aligned on these things? Is there something else that we want to try or experiment with? Is there something else that would make you feel like you've got a greater sense of comfort or love or desire in the relationship or whatever the thing is so, so very important. Never assume that you or your partner is the same person today that they were 10 years ago or whenever the relationship started. And that is
Yeah.
so beautiful. Um,
There's a couple things I'll mention in response to that. So the first is relationships evolve. So in book three, we talk about relationship evolution. And so at first you're building, and then you're enmeshing, and then you're differentiating in every relationship. And so at each stage of a relationship, you become a different person. And the relationship either evolves with the new people that you become, or it doesn't. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is we talk about the need for check-ins and the need
mhm,
for periodic renegotiations. And
yeah.
so a check-in is a weekly thing. How are we doing financially? How are we doing physically? How are we doing emotionally? How are we doing sexually? All of that, right? Doing that on a
Mhm.
weekly basis. And then having your renegotiations, if you're poly, probably on a quarterly basis because things change more quickly. But if you're not, if you're in a relationship and you're not checking in on a consistent basis to say, hey, how have we changed and what is now needed from this relationship for us, then you're probably going to run into some other form of relationship agony, if not polyagony.
Yeah. I could expand on that in great detail, or I would love to have you expand on that one in great detail. But as we wrap up today's episode, there are three things that I'm walking away with. Well, I mean, there's a multitude of things, but tell me if what I'm hearing is right. So, I mean, one, I would say freedom without structure creates chaos, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Two, most relationships breakdowns are failures of clarity, not necessarily of love. And
Hmm.
third, the courage to define agreements is the foundation of trust. What would you add to that?
The only thing I would say is it's not just a failure of clarity, it's a failure of communication.
Hmm.
So what I'm advocating for is more communication,
Hmm.
period. The
Hmm.
more that we are talking to our partners about our hopes and fears, the stronger our relationship will be. And that's what this all boils down to. How are we communicating?
Yeah, oh, that's beautiful. Well, Candace, let's fast forward 20 years. If
Mhm.
if someone described your impact, not your titles, not your resume, but your impact, how would you hope or what would you hope they would say about the conversations that you normalized?
Well, first, my hope is that when I look back on my life, people are able to say, "Candace built a world of generosity."
Mhm.
That is my number one vision for the world. And one way I'm doing that is normalizing these conversations around non-traditional families, such
Mhm.
that every child can be born into a family where they feel celebrated and they know that anything is possible. That's what I'm going for here. And so right now, that happens to be LGBTQP, and the conversations will continue to change over time, but it's all building that world of generosity.
Ah, that's beautiful. I love that. Now, Candace, for our listeners who want to explore your work, your book, or connect with you, where should they go?
You can find everything at polyagony.com. So you can find events that I'm hosting, workshops and retreats that I'm facilitating, the book, all of it. The glossary I mentioned earlier, it's all at polyagony.com.
Amazing. Well, again, thank you, Candace. I mean, this conversation was powerful because growth isn't just about scale. It's about honesty. It's about courage. It's about alignment between what you say and how you live.
Mhm.
Candace challenged us to rethink how we design connection and whether we've been intentional at all. If this episode resonated, share it with someone who needs a deeper conversation about structure, freedom, and growth. Make sure to follow the show, leave a review, and remember, growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Candace, it was a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on the Perpetual Growth Podcast today. And to our guests, we'll see you next time.